Hello, Jim. It's great to have you back at the Indonesian Economic Forum, and we are really grateful for your time. And thank you for logging in from the US, from Washington, D.C. I know that because of the time zone difference, it's difficult for you to be here in person. So we thought we'll have a session with you and hear some of the views that you have about how you see the Indonesian economy progressing, especially in relevance to the fact that we just finished a very successful G20. And how do you see the business climate going forward?
Well, hello, Sachin, and hello, everyone, all the participants. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but it's great to be part of the Indonesian Executive Forum. And so I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. And as Sachin indicated, obviously, you can't talk about Indonesia today without talking about the G20. And I just recall when the Ukraine-Russian hostilities broke out, we all thought, oh, it was bad luck for Indonesia because it would ruin the G20. In the event, it turned out quite differently for two reasons. One, of course, I think the discussions went very well at G20, and they came up with a statement, and so the meeting itself was a success rather than a disaster, as many feared. But equally important, because of the tensions, this G20 got more global media attention than perhaps all the other G20s combined. And every time it was mentioned Indonesia. And so people would say, Indonesia, Indonesia, what about it? And if you look at Indonesia today and over the COVID era, so to speak, its economy has formed very well. So all of a sudden people say, oh, Indonesia, we better give it another look. So I think for two reasons. One, a very successful outcome for all participants, and a very successful performance by Indonesia. President Jokowi, who we all know had avoided international affairs for the first 7 years as much as he could, really showed his chops. I think he did a wonderful job and gained a lot of prestige, both for himself and for Indonesia. But what does it all mean? We are in the middle of a growing superpower conflict, and there's no doubt about that. And I just want to mention an article that was written by Gideon Rahman, a very good an analyst in the Financial Times. And he really got Indonesia right. For someone who's not an expert, that's very good. He says, in trying to stay neutral in an emerging superpower conflict, Indonesia is reaching back to an older tradition. It played a key role in the foundation of the non-aligned movement and the Bandung Conference in 1955, and the underlying instinct of Indonesia and many other non-Western nations that will assemble in Bali remains the same: to navigate the tensions between superpowers and avoid signing up to either camp. As a leader, Widodo has some similarities to Da Silva in Brazil. Both Indonesian and Brazilian leaders have risen from humble origins and are proud of their connections with ordinary people. Both want good relations with the US while retaining an innate skepticism about American motives grounded in their own country's histories. So you could change those motives to Western motives. And this is one reason why we won't see stark alignment with Western goals. I'm looking at it now from the American point of view because I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. And so I think we in the U.S. often forget the histories and the narratives of the middle powers, as they've come to be called, and really showed their stuff here. But in any case, we come to Indonesia today with many positives. GDP growth around 5%, among the higher of the large economies. Inflation around 5%, not bad in these tough times. Positive trade balance, low debt to GDP ratio, growing population, and political stability. There are some negatives. Like everyone else, we're affected by the hostilities in Europe and the China slowdown. Manufacturing slowdowns is causing layoffs in a number of sectors, especially textiles, footwear, and electronics. There is a history of legal uncertainty for investors here, which is often experienced in the resource sector and other areas, and the heavy dependency on state-owned enterprises to drive the economy. Still, Indonesia has much to recommend it to foreign investors, with 26% of the population under 15, in stark contrast to the rest of aging Asia. It's also maintained a careful diplomatic neutrality, as I mentioned. It's the world's fourth largest country, et cetera. We all know this. Some of the positive areas for investment are nickel and electric vehicle transportation, but it's not just natural resources related items where Indonesia is strong. Jakarta's become one of the Southeast Asia's most successful incubators of new technology companies, and this is growing very rapidly. Another factor has been Indonesia's sound macroeconomic management. The finance minister, of course, is a respected former managing director of the World Bank. Bank Indonesia leaders have great credibility, and the government is restoring its pre-pandemic budget deficit cap of 3% of GDP, and it's really benefiting. The rupiah has been relatively stable in the face of rising interest rates in the West and a stronger US dollar. We've had a number of important investments in the green energy space. Indonesia just formalized a collaboration with the Australian renewable energy company Sun Cable, taking the first steps to create an energy distribution network that should unlock about $100 billion in green industry's economic potential in the archipelago over the next decade. So there are a number of strengths. There are, of course, risks. There are risks everywhere. We do have inconsistency, lack of legal certainty, reliance on state-owned enterprises. This is not a particular knock on Indonesia's state-owned enterprises. It's just the problems and the burdens that state-owned enterprises have. They can't be competitive. They're too much dependent on political whims, and Indonesia sometimes suffers from the same thing. There is a concern about the management of the economy post-Jokowi. We hope the next finance team that comes in 2024 will be equally cautious and conservative and manage with the same skill that this team has for the last decade and longer. Economic nationalism springs its head. There's talk of a cartel for battery minerals, which will violate pretty much every trade agreement Indonesia has signed. So that'll be a difficult workaround for people. Manufacturing overall, Indonesian manufacturing sector is not strong. It's dropped from 30% of GDP 20 years ago to about 19% today. And so there are some other areas here because of domestic content rules, because of non-tariff barriers. Indonesia has not attracted its fair share of investment that's moving south from China into places like Vietnam and over to places like Bangladesh. And the property debt is a bit of a concern. It's not public sector debt, so it's probably it won't develop into the same kind of problem that China is having, but it is there and something to be concerned with. Meanwhile, we've got the election coming up. I won't try and handicap that. We have three popular figures who are leading the polls. We all know their names: Prabowo Subianto, the current Minister of Defense; Ganjar Pranowo, the governor of West Java; and Anies Baswedan, the former governor of Jakarta, who had to step down because of the term rules recently. Ganjar and Prabowo are leading all the polls, but we have the problem of nominations, and I won't go into too much detail here, but the real question is whether PDIP, Ganjar's party, will nominate him or Megawati's daughter. Megawati's daughter, unfortunately, for her and her mother's ambitions, is not doing well in the polls. So that would be a difficult situation. If she were to nominate her daughter, Ganjar may or may not jump, but it would, if he doesn't jump to another party, then he's out of the race, and it would be pretty good running for Prabowo and for Anies. So we'll see how that happens. It's all in speculation. And we read about the agreements between Anies and Nasdem and so on. But remember, the tickets aren't submitted until October next year. So no agreement made today has any legal force at all. And the day before, on October 20, I think it's October 23rd, is the first day for submission. If you change your mind on October 22nd, it's no problem. So there's a lot more diplomatic shuffling to observe. Having said that, what does it mean from a business point of view? Right now, it's hard to identify any significant economic differences, policy differences in the candidates. And this is quite remarkable. We have a tremendous consensus among the political elite, which Jokowi has forged in the parliament, that Indonesia is currently on the right track. And the omnibus bill reforms reflect that. They're very modest reforms. They don't by any means threaten the state domination of the economy. The private sector is a tool of public policy, not an independent engine of growth. No one in any significant political party is arguing otherwise. There's no significant labor party to oppose things very seriously, like the minimum wage and so on. And so what we have is a remarkable policy consensus. We may like it, we may not like it, but it's what I believe we're going to have to live with, not only for the rest of the Jokowi term, but also into the future of the new president, whoever he or she might be. Now, this is, again, we may like it, we may not. Some sectors, the rules are very encouraging to private sector investment. Others are very restrictive. So we'll have its horses for courses in that regard, but it is a policy that's been able to deliver about 5% growth, 5 to 6% growth pretty steadily for over a decade now, and go back into the SBY presidency. So it's maybe not the ideal neoliberal economic policy with open markets, but it is a policy that delivers results. Maybe it costs some growth. I think it does. I think the current policy structure, under the current policy structure, we won't see Indonesia growing at 6-7%. It just won't happen. But I do believe with continued good fiscal management, 5% steady growth is very, very achievable. And if they continue to succeed in attracting the digital economy investors, and of course, there's the local, not just foreign investors, as some of the biggest unicorns are Indonesian unicorns. So it's a very good situation from that point of view. In terms of threats to stability, we do have, we always have to be, in today's world, we look at religious radicalism. In Indonesia, it takes a form of Islamic radicalism. But we've seen that is, while potentially volatile, it's also very weak. And the establishment, both the civilian and military establishment, seems to be united. They are quite united in face of protecting stability and limiting and eliminating radicalism and violent radicalism and social change. As long as we have a vibrant, open democracy, I think that will continue to be the case, and there's no sign that democracy itself is under any threat here. So just to conclude my remarks, I think President Jokowi's unexpected embrace of international diplomacy obligations and opportunities has significantly enhanced Indonesia's image abroad and his own popularity at home. And by the way, all presidential candidates are desperately seeking his approval. He has an approval rate of 60, 70, sometimes higher percent. And I'm now sitting in America where the presidents are lucky to get 40%. So it's quite remarkable. He has successfully consolidated his position. There's no serious opposition. He's no lame duck. He has about 2 more years to go, no lame duck. He and his allies control virtually all access to positions, power, and government economic activity. It remains much better for any party or ambitious politician to be inside looking out rather than outside looking in. On the legislative front, however, the Job Creation Bill or Omnibus Bill exhausted legislative reform energies of the leadership. No significant new economic reform initiatives are likely beyond some badly needed tax reform. As we all know, Indonesia's tax collection as a percentage of GDP is one of the lowest in Asia at 10 to 13%. There's only two countries in Asia, according to the OECD, that have a lower ratio. Higher oil prices, however, have forced the government to raise fuel prices. The political establishment has not resisted. And while there have been demonstrations from labor and groups and students, there's no organized opposition, and none of the potential candidates for 2024 have made it an issue, at least not so far. So the challenges to growth acceleration, the government needs to increase social spending for healthcare and education while maintaining its spending on infrastructure and development. All sectors that have faced significant regulatory obstacles to private investment and/or favoritism for SOEs. This will put pressure on the budget, not to mention that the government is finally trying to upgrade its military capabilities, particularly in Navy and Air Force, where it lags far behind regional standards, and which are becoming much more obviously critical with problems in the South China or the North Natuna Sea. So the need to significantly improve tax collection remains a major challenge. Despite significant improvement in the investment climate, in the omnibus bill and jobs creation law, the investment and trade environment remains relatively restricted in comparison with rival manufacturing destinations, but it does offer significant new opportunities for foreign investment in a number of areas like education, healthcare, and the digital economy. So the next 24 months should be pretty good. The most serious near-term economic challenges will come from the international environment rather than domestic. China's slowdown will inevitably affect both commodity prices and its ability to continue its role as a major foreign investor. The domestic challenges will be to continue to make progress in improving social welfare and equality while maintaining macro stability, as well as funding this upgrading that I mentioned. Nevertheless, the government will continue to exercise tight control on the budget and should be able to return to a 3% deficit cap within the next several years. So the bottom line is, given Indonesia's long tradition of conservative fiscal management, the significant level of infrastructure investment by the current administration, and the lack of significant political or social challenges to the current economic policy environment, we expect very stable government and little change in business operating conditions over the next 2 years. The biggest transition risk in 2024 may well be the appointment of a weaker finance minister who cannot effectively defend the prudent fiscal policies of the last decade in the face of strong fiscal challenges that inevitably come from a democratically elected parliament. This consistency, coupled with continued prudent fiscal policies, which we consider highly likely, is proving more attractive to foreign investors in the sectors that are open to them. This will support growth. SOEs will continue to dominate many areas of the economy, making acceleration beyond 5 to 5.5% unlikely, but still that's a good number. Political stability and the continuation of current economic investment policies should provide steady growth in the 5 to 6% range through 2024, and despite the expected global challenges, and around 5% plus thereafter. So I think we're looking at a very positive picture.
Thanks for sharing a very concise insights about how Indonesia works, because I think that's the hallmark of your program, the Indonesia Country Program. A lot of the insights that you've been sharing are the internal workings of how this country has been, backing the business environment and how things actually work. So just a question, I want to end this with a couple of questions to you. Do you believe that the G20 has given an overall much bigger exposure to Indonesia, and in terms of now putting Indonesia on the center stage? How do you see that whole thing play out?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I think I said in my opening remarks, the global media exposure has been fantastic, and to have the conference go well and to have people curious about Indonesia and at a time Indonesia is doing quite well economically, I think it's just been a tremendous plus. And I think we can build on that. I think I wasn't, of course, at the G20 or B20 meetings in Bali, but a lot of my friends were, and the mood at the B20 meetings was fantastic. Thailand did a wonderful job. The local chamber, the foreign chambers of commerce did a wonderful job. AmCham, EuroCham, AusCham. They did really, I got a lot of positive feedback. And so I think there'll be some very good things to come out of this. And certainly the exposure has been tremendously positive. And so all credit, of course, the president, but all his staff did a remarkable job.
So any takeaways into going into the chairmanship of ASEAN? Because that's what's coming up next for Indonesia.
Well, let's hope Indonesia builds on its momentum. Now, ASEAN has a couple of very difficult challenges, as we know, particularly the Myanmar situation is very, very difficult. There just doesn't seem to be any room for or any willingness on the part of the current government in Myanmar to negotiate the situation. So that's going to be a challenge, but I hope that both Indonesia's experience in dealing with an equally difficult problem in G20 and the credibility it's gained as a neutral player that both sides can feel some confidence in will continue into the ASEAN situation and make it an effective year for ASEAN under Indonesian leadership. So I'm reasonably optimistic, recognizing that it's a very, very difficult challenge.
You had mentioned in between, Jim, that one of the emerging sectors is the digital economy, and Indonesia seems to have carved a place for itself. But the digital economy is not just about digital companies; it's about existing companies that are also transforming digitally, right? So, do you see any particular area that you feel Indonesia could contribute to the rest of the world, and not just to focus on how the domestic digital economy develops? Do you see any areas that you feel?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but the interesting thing about digital economy is it has no home in the sense that it's not culturally based, so it can be developed anywhere. An Indonesian program that works is the same as a Silicon Valley program that works. Now, in these areas, a lot of the scaling has already been done, particularly in the U.S. with your Amazons and all these companies. But we see, I think, some of the companies like Gojek leading the way here in similar services, but they're first in the market here. And we'll just have to see who the survivors are, who consolidates with who. We've seen consolidation in the Asian market with some of the Indonesian companies, with some of the Singapore companies. I just think it's a wide open field that knows no home. It just is for bright young people, if there were to come up with the next best idea, and it can be solved anywhere. So I don't see it as particularly grounded. But the thing about Indonesia, if you get the right services, the country's big enough, you can get scale where you don't have to be intimidated by the global players. So Indonesia can build up scale more quickly than a smaller country might be able to do. So that might be a little bit of an edge, but I don't really see that as having a flag. I really think that's just Indonesia provides a good environment for it. It's not overly regulated. And so I think Indonesia will continue to play a very big role.
So do you see the opportunity for digital to play a big role in the regional areas? Let's say there's so many provinces that are there. And typically, most of rest of Indonesia has been, resource-based, natural resources, agriculture, etc. Do you see a play there which should be probably explored?
Oh, absolutely. I know you're involved in another venture in education, and I haven't spent much time on education but it is one of Indonesia's Achilles heels. Elementary school education here is not up to regional standard generally. And so something like Orbit Guru that helps improve the quality of teaching around the region can bring national and international standards to the smallest areas of Indonesia. And this is really, the same can be done in healthcare. You don't have to visit the doctor personally. If we can do these things online, there's just tremendous opportunity. And as we've seen, it doesn't have to overcome existing infrastructure. So there's a lot of opportunity. And yes, indeed, it's a good point. It's a good question that you asked, because this can really help the outer islands, if we still use that term here, but that have been hampered by lack of logistics, poor communication. Connectivity is the key, and this can really bring ideas and goods and services throughout the country in an unprecedented fashion. So there's still a very big upside there.
So, in terms of regional decentralization, you see there are more provinces being added in Indonesia. Do you see that as a positive, or what's your view on that?
That's a political question, and I just don't know it was very interesting that prior to the Papua situation, lots of areas wanted to be separated. They figure the more power, more control, local government, which is good. And I was surprised at the resistance, and I don't know all the political ramifications of Papua, but why it's considered by some a negative. We'll see. Of course, quality of governance is a real problem. And here, connectivity and so on is very important. So it will be a challenge, and in the smaller places that don't have the same level of human resources as the bigger areas have, that's always an issue. But again, I think the government should focus on that and can really help raise the quality of domestic local services. So let's just see what happens. But a lot of that's a political question and depends very much on the political response of the local actors.
That was a very good, insightful session. Thank you very much for joining the Indonesia Economic Forum. We hope that in some of our subsequent sessions, you could be there live, and we really look forward to engaging more with you. You are on a board of governors, so that's one of the insights that we get from you is of real value to our viewership across the world. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you for inviting me. Good luck to the rest of the conference, and good luck to all the participants. Let's hope the future is at least as bright as I've predicted it, and even better. So thank you all, and best wishes for every success.